All right. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. We're going long today on Ethicsverse Day 2.0. That first session, not my words, the best session Ethico has ever done. Imagine that. So no pressure, Matt, Andy, and Reid, who will be joining us here in a second. As we get started, drop that LinkedIn URL in the chat. Let's keep this chat going. We broke a new record for emojis, which you know I'm eating on today because since I don't have time to eat. 16,669 emojis, if you can believe it. So we got to break that record. We got to double that during this session. As we get started here, I want to talk about a couple of the books we are giving away. I love reading, of course, as you know, readers are leaders. So we're giving away 3 books in the world famous Ethico book giveaway in this session. This session is called, I got dumped on with a bunch of water because I got these sessions wrong, so I'm not going to risk that again. Smart Moves, Safe Bets, Practical Gen AI for Ethics and Compliance. So we're giving away 3 books. We're giving away a great book on behavioral science called Misbehaving, another one on misbehaving by our good friend of the show, friend of the family, Christian Hunt, called Humanizing Rules, and of course, this phenomenal book that people can't stop talking about by the one and only, in my book, smartest AI ethicist in the world, the one and only Reid Blackman, Ethical Machines. He has a phenomenal Substack, a great podcast as well, and a highly reviewed book. Okay, so guess how many of those we're giving away? We're giving away 10 because we love you. So whoever's active in the chat, whoever's asking those questions, we'll of course try to weave those in. And so as you're dropping your LinkedIn URL in the chat, because you remember I say every week, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. We have to take advantage of, this community that we're a part of. You get no bonus points in life reinventing the wheel. Nobody's tombstone says he was really great at reinventing wheels, okay? So we have another great giveaway for you today. We have our risk management package. So it's time to manage our risk in a smart way. We have to make better bets with our time. Our risk management package is 25% off, which includes disclosures. It includes flexible risk assessments, and it includes a reporting dashboard. All that stuff is built in. So if you hit that demo button today, you'll be able to lock in that 25% off, even if it's not, even if it's several months before you're ready to go ahead and make a move. Now is the time to do it. So this risk management package does a lot for you to help drive better risk intelligence and help you make better bets with your time. Sorry, my screen just messed up here. Let me put this up on the screen for you. You're just looking at books, aren't you? Okay. So, we're going to be giving away this package. There's 10 of those. There's 10 books to give away. Our package is going to help you get better engagement. You're going to get better risk intelligence. You can do bite-sized risk assessments on AI, for example, and send that around to stakeholders and see how phantom AI use might be introducing some new risk into your organization. And you can incorporate, and you can really reinforce this culture of risk management. You can't do risk management by yourself. You can't run a compliance program by yourself. You can't build a culture of integrity by yourself. It takes the behavior of the stakeholders inside your organization. It takes their engagement and their participation in it. So there's a reason that Ethico was named the world's best ethics and compliance software company per G2, not my words, okay? These are all verified users. So if you're thinking about making a move, or it feels like the romance is gone, or you're sick of getting passed around from one private equity owned organization to another, check out G2. You're going to see a bunch of verified reviews from users of the Ethico platform. And with that little commercial out of the way, I also want to let you know that we got a phenomenal prize pack today, okay? So for one lucky user or one lucky viewer who's participating a lot, who's asking great questions, who's sharing their insights, you're going to get a phenomenal prize pack of a cool hoodie. You're going to get a cool mug, and you're going to get a couple of books as well. So you're not going to want to miss that. Okay, with that, I want to pass it over. We got a panel of 3 kings. Let's get a massive emoji explosion for these guys. I'm going to pass it over to the one and only coolest guy in compliance, Matt Kelly. If you do not follow Matt on LinkedIn and you don't follow his blog, Radical Compliance, I want you to open up a new tab, Control-T, new tab, go over to Radical Compliance, sign up for that. I guarantee you will get smarter if you're in that Matt Kelly orbit. How's it going, Matt?
Going very well, Nick. Thank you very much for that introduction. So everybody who is joining us, I see we have like 1,000, 1,200 people, something like that for this session. We are here to talk about artificial intelligence, and we have a lot of ground we could cover, but broadly speaking, we want to talk about how you can get a grip on the governance of AI within, sure, your specific compliance function. We'll talk a bit about how AI could help you there, but more broadly, how are you, the compliance or risk management person, supposed to get your head around AI that's happening elsewhere in your enterprise. We're not going to go through all the risks that AI poses because I think a lot of people know that. And if we listed them all, we would be here for the rest of the day. But more, how can you think about risk management around AI at a systemic level? How can you build some sort of governance oversight structure? Who's in charge of that? Who's not? What do you do as the compliance officer? Who else is going to help you? We have a lot of ground to cover on those issues. So as Nick said, we have a couple of great panelists here. Him being one of them, but the other speakers that we have with us are Reid Blackman, who is author of that book that Nick had talked about. He is also AI ethics advisory counselor. He is CEO of Virtue, which is a ethics advisory firm on AI issues. Reid, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome. Yep. You out there, Reid?
He's not going to talk a lot on this session. He's just going to kind of be here.
There he is. And also joining us is Andrew McBride. So Andrew these days is CEO of his own compliance advisory firm, Integrity Bridge. People might also remember Andrew's name because he's the former head of compliance at Albemarle Corporation, which had a big FCPA resolution a couple of years ago. And Andrew was at the heart of bringing Albemarle out of that. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us too.
Pleasure to be here.
Andrew, I thought you were handsome before but round of applause for that beard. You just like 10x your handsomeness, my man.
I noticed the beard too.
I saw the video from last year come up just before. It's like a real compare and contrast. This is a courtesy of kind of like started growing it when I was on vacation in London, and it just kept on growing. Wrong season to be growing a beard, let me just say.
All right. So I have plenty of questions to ask about AI risks and how we can think them through. Certainly, listeners, if you have questions along the way, feel free to pop them into the attendee chat or the Q&A function, and we'll try and get them to our speakers as quickly as we can. But I had wanted to to set the table, ask everybody how compliance officers should be thinking about risks around AI right now. We could take this conversation in 1,000 different directions, but I actually think that's part of the challenge is compliance officers don't know where they're supposed to start with AI risks. So what should they be thinking about, or where are these risks coming from? Should they worry about looming new regulations? Because there are many. Should we be worried about the risks of AI use cases in your enterprise going wrong? Because that can happen. Should we worry about something else? Like, how are we supposed to think about this? I'll start with Reid and then Andrew and then Nick. What would you say?
Okay, so you can hear me now, right?
We can.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so where should they start? I wouldn't start, what was the first thing that you said? Oh, regulations. No, don't start with regulations. That's because it's too much in flux and will always be in flux. And the thing that needs to be created is a kind of framework and approach that's flexible enough and agile enough to accommodate a patchwork of regulations across this country and others, and to adapt to new regulations that are going to come online, and others will disappear, and so on and so forth. So I wouldn't start with regulatory compliance. I think that's going to be too hard. I think actually the thing to start with is pushing internal political alignment. The biggest obstacle by far in doing what I would call AI ethical risk mitigation or management, but corporates tend to call responsible AI or trustworthy AI or something like that, is a lack of internal political alignment on what the risks are, what the sources are, let alone what to do about them. So I think that if compliance starts with, hey, here's what you need to do, forget it, you're going to hit a brick wall, because we're still at a place where most people don't recognize the importance, the importance of the risks, the severity of the risks, the probability of the risks. They're just, maybe you and I have been talking about bias in AI and privacy violations and hallucinations for a long time, but most people in our organization have not. It's still day one for them. And until you get that buy-in, which presupposes understanding the basics, it doesn't matter what policy you put forward, what checklist you give them, none of it matters, because it's not landing in an environment where it can actually be taken up in a meaningful way. So I think step number one is getting alignment. cross-functionally, cross-departmentally, and that's going to require a lot of education.
Okay. Andrew, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything that Reid has said, and I'd add, it also kind of depends on what the AI application is going to be. So, and I mean that at the broader sense. So, if AI is going to be used as a customer-facing tool out in the marketplace, so it's actually going to be part of your product, that's one thing, and that's going to necessitate a level of investment both on the operational and the risk management side. If it's more on the back end, where it's enhancing your processes around supply chain, perhaps less of a risk, but also needs to be requiring some investment. If your company is still we've just launched an enterprise AI tool for people to experiment with, then you're at a different stage of maturity, which requires perhaps a lighter framework. And so once you've kind of figured that out, then understanding what are those regulations that are out there, and rather than trying to go through the minutiae as Reid was suggesting that you don't, that just trying to get to a light framework that is nimble enough to keep up with changes in the technology, I think is going to be appropriate. Also, just making sure that if you've got your enterprise risk management framework, that you're tying it in with that. That's already a defined risk management process. It's nothing different. Make sure that you're you're assessing the severity and the likelihood of the risks associated with that ERM framework, and then communicating the risks through that process.
And Nick, give me your thoughts, and then I'm going to circle back to Reid and Andrew again, because I agree with what Reid said, that you have to have internal political alignment. I am still curious how difficult it's going to be to get that. Like, do we have different parts of the enterprise that are disagreeing about what the AI issues are, how we're supposed to worry about it? Listeners, I'd love for you to comment in the chat. How much do you think? Does your company even know what it wants to do with AI yet, or do you have different voices talking past each other? But Nick, as you're listening to this, what are your first thoughts about how do we even get our head focused in the right direction here?
Well, I think everyone's kind of on a spectrum, and I think that's a kind of a risk spectrum, risk appetite spectrum. I think everybody is also on like a spectrum of like AI adoption throughout the organization. And we have to keep in mind, I love what Reid said before, that, don't start with these regulations because the regulations are lagging. And if you think about how regulations are sort of birthed, it's always birthed out of something that has already gone wrong. So with this technology that's moving so fast, that's not been sort of adopted and sort of stabilized, there's not a lot of regulation that like we can lean on. And so to Andrew's point, we need a light framework, and we need to think about this from a risk mitigation perspective. So we obviously need to know our business on the one hand, and we also need to know how AI is being used within the business. And I think when we're equipped with that, it's a lot easier to kind of get people to kind of create that political alignment, as Reid called it, within the organization. I think it's incumbent on us. In the absence of it's like if you're driving a car on a road, you just have to kind of keep it between the lines. That's kind of akin to, a bunch of regulations in your space. If you're just driving across like a countryside, there's still sort of risk mitigating techniques that you're using to not make the car flip and so forth. We have to lean more into that because those lines on the road aren't there for this technology. So we have to be smart about it, and we have to engage in some kind of persuasion and some kind of interaction with these different stakeholders in the business if we're ever going to get that political alignment. Like, look, 10 years from now, I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of regulations because a bunch of things have gone wrong. And, the regulations have sort of caught up to the risks that are inherent with this technology. But right now, it's kind of all over the place, and it's moving faster than any of us, even know. Reid wrote this article recently, highly reviewed, by the way, about agentic AI, and that organizations aren't ready for it. And I've seen multiple people sort of share that article because it was so good and so insightful. And like the comments below it, where people like, oh, I didn't even know about agentic AI. So that's just kind of proof that this thing is moving so fast. We as sort of risk managers, we don't have like a good handle on it. So what are we going to do? If there's not regulation for us to like rely on as a crutch, we have to like reach inside of our own golden brains and apply the risk management frameworks that like we've built over time. And I think it can be very intimidating sorry to ramble on here, but like it can be very intimidating because it's moving so fast and who knows what the risks are. I think if we can zoom out of it and just realize that like this is not really that different than anything else. Business risks are changing all the time, and usually there's a sort of a consistent, semi-consistent application of risk management frameworks across various these bouquet of risks that are going to be applied here. It's our job to sort of pull that future forward and de-risk our organizations now.
But so, Reid, I want to circle back to you on getting internal political alignment. I mean, is it hard in your observation? Do you see a lot of customers or clients or companies out there generally, are they really struggling to understand what they want to do? I'm looking at the chat. We still have a lot of people who are talking about, well, what different types of AI do we mean? And, I love the listeners, but some of it is still, we're struggling with some very elementary questions that the company needs to answer for itself. And I don't know that they know how to do that yet. What do you think? What do you see?
Yeah, the internal alignment, it's the hardest. It's not like, is it hard? It's the hardest. It's just the hardest. Everything else is, in comparison, relatively easy in a way. Because we know, yes, look, there's stuff at the cutting edge, the bleeding edge that I wrote about in the article that Nick mentioned that is really difficult to do from a people, process, and technology perspective. It's hard. But there's a lot of stuff, a lot of core stuff that we have a good idea about how to manage those risks appropriately. So the main thing is that political alignment. That's the hardest piece. Let me say a little bit more about that. It's easy for them to say something like, "Oh yeah, privacy, that's a risk. Privacy violations are a risk. Your bias in AI, sure, that's a risk." I find, and this is what. So let me say one more thing about why it's so important. I work primarily with Fortune 500 companies. There's one client that sticks out, and a lot of these people, when they're building responsible AI programs or trusted AI programs, and usually we're working with the C-suite or the level below the C-suite and creating these things. It takes forever. It just takes forever, right? Because you've got so many cooks in the kitchen. Everyone's got an opinion. This is going to get sort of laid down in policy. It's going to go to the board of directors. They're going to have to approve it. So it takes a long time. And so one issue is, what do we do when we're waiting for all that official stuff to get alignment on all that official stuff? That's one issue. The other issue is that if you don't have all the relevant people in the room, then it's going to go nowhere. So I have one particular client that I'm thinking of, very large organization, multinational, blah, blah. They did a great job of creating the policy, high-level procedures, metrics for measuring compliance with the procedures that are associated with the AI risk program. And it went up to the board. The board approved the whole thing. Amazing. One reason why it happened so quickly is because the person who was in charge of it, she's really smart. Everything that we explained to her, she got immediately. She understood the pros and cons for various decisions. She's like, got it. Yes to that, no to that. Let's do this. What about this? Can we do that? Fast. When I say fast, I still mean it takes months, but because there's a lot of stuff to figure out. And then it got handed off to the person who leads AI in that organization. The brakes are slammed. They went, to my knowledge, to this day, months and months later, it's gone nowhere because that person was like, "But I lead AI here. What do you? No, we're not gonna do that." But the board said they don't care what the board said. Oh yeah, they'll like go through the motions to say that they're abiding by what the policy approved board approved policy, but they're not actually going to do it, not in practice. And so you could go slow and get alignment, but that's frustrating. So you bounce over to let's go fast with a small group of people to build this thing, but then you don't get an alignment and you hit a wall anyway. So anyway, this is just my sort of long, rambly way of saying it's very important. It's also very difficult. I'll say one last thing and then I'll shut up myself.
Sure.
Lately, I found that what really helps the alignment issue is focusing on what I call the ethical nightmares. So
Yes.
We can talk about risk in the abstract, like privacy violations, bias, but if you can get enterprise leaders, department heads, project teams, what are the ethical nightmares that are associated with the business as a whole, this department, this particular AI project? What are those nightmares? What are the resources you're going to have to avoid those nightmares? And how will you train people to effectively use those resources? We found that rallying against the nightmares or rallying around the nightmares has been effective in driving alignment because nobody wants the nightmares to happen.
So, Andrew, let me take it over to you. Talk a bit to me, in your opinion, where do you see that compliance functions are not going to be prepared to be able to handle this? Some of what Reid is saying actually does sound very familiar, like focusing on ethical nightmares. I can remember 20 years ago when anti-corruption enforcement was picking up, people would focus on anti-corruption enforcement nightmares. It would take you 6 years and cost $1 zillion, and then you have to pay a fee and all that. And that got corporations focused. So that strategy is very similar to what Reid is talking about here, but there's still an awful lot of learning that has to happen. Still an awful lot of lack of alignment or understanding who owns AI, which is already a question that's come up in the chat at least 2 or 3 times in the last 10 minutes. So where do you see that compliance functions officers, where are they going to struggle? Where do you think they're not in position? What's that bumpy road going to be like?
So you could go, like much of this session, you could go anywhere with that question, but I'll focus on kind of 2, which are really skills and experience in two aspects. So one is the technical skills to actually understand the AI use case that is being put forward. So to be able to do that risk assessment, compliance may not be the subject matter expert, but you still have to understand a baseline kind of what that technology involves. What are the inputs? What are the underlying assumptions? What is the prompt structuring? How is it all being set up in order to do that assessment? And then, as we'll come on later on, the monitoring. So there's a technical aspect that I think is a challenge to all compliance officers on this call. How are you all upskilling with understanding AI writ large? But then secondly, what we're seeing is that AI is just becoming kind of like everywhere in terms of use cases. And so to Reid's point, you're going to have AI use cases in manufacturing, in supply chain, in HR. Well, compliance aren't subject matter experts in each and every one of those areas. And it's really the scary stuff, those kind of nightmare scenarios, that compliance in and of itself is not going to know what those are just by itself. Right. It requires that involvement of the right people for that particular use case to get together and say, okay, in your ordinary day, leaving aside AI, what are the worst things that could go wrong? What is AI doing to kind of exacerbate that risk from a manufacturing or a supply chain perspective? The challenge, I think, is that you then kind of add in that extra layer of, well, you've got the people that are actually doing the development of the AI, like the first line, within those functions. And then you're supposed to have some sort of second line that are independently kicking the tires. But then it becomes a resource play. You're really going to have like a first and a second line for every kind of function when it's talking about the development of AI. I just don't think that's realistic. But there is there's still that need for some degree of independent kicking of the tires, making sure you've both got the independent technical and the subject matter expertise to be able to validate the use case.
I think that's a phenomenal point. Sorry, Matt. And I think that kind of speaks to, maybe I'm being dramatic, surprise, but this is kind of like speaks to the existential threat that our departments have facing them right now, and it's the lack of that sort of technical expertise. And I'm putting expertise in quotes because there's very few like true AI experts, just given how fast things are moving. But there's a gap that's widening faster almost than the speed of light between like what the technology is doing and where the average compliance person is on their own sort of J curve or their own learning curve about what AI can do. And I think that like our risk aversion to this new technology, because we read some article 2 years ago about some lawyer that was disbarred because he used AI to like write a brief, is preventing us from like getting in the pool. And again, I'm not saying you have to spend all summer in the library reading books on swimming. I am saying though that you need to jump into the pool and start in the shallow end and just kind of see how the water feels. I think we have a lot of risk. I was talking about this a couple of minutes ago, but we've all been managing risks in our businesses for years. And as you start to play with it, you're going to start to be able to actually engage in that ethical nightmare planning scenario that Reid alluded to. That's also in his article, which the link was dropped in the chat. Read that thing and see what that ethical nightmare planning scenario is. That's a very powerful framework to start to explore and understand and perhaps anticipate some of the risks that AI could be introducing to your business. But if you can't even go through that process that ethical nightmare planning process because you just haven't engaged in this technology at all, you're going to kind of be behind the 8 ball. And I think now is the time for us to be able to, again, we're at this inflection point with our industry in many different ways. Now is the time for us to really add value to our business, because odds are leadership who's pushing for more profitability, who are reading articles in their favorite publication, talking about there's probably 20 extra points of margin in your business, and you're falling behind your competitors in your company's adoption of AI. That drive for more profitability is probably going to cause them to take on risks that they're not really anticipating. We need to be both a countervailing force to that, so that we don't kind of get our finger caught in the machine, but also like we just can't like remanifest being the office of no and saying like, well, we can't have any AI, because I guarantee you people are going to be using it. People are always searching for efficiency for their job. So the presence of it and the prevalence of it is going to be, it's well beyond whatever your policy is in place. And I think we have to know enough to be dangerous if we're going to add the value that we can potentially add in this new era.
Can I just add one thing? I completely agree with what Andrew and Nick are saying, especially around the expertise or the competency, at least, that's needed.
Yeah.
Andrew and Nick put it in terms of technical expertise. I might put it slightly differently. I would say that you need to have some degree of expertise or competency in talking with those who have technical expertise. You don't have to be a coder. I mean, I think one of the things that compliance people shouldn't think is, I need to be a sort of like a quasi data scientist or an engineer in order to do my work with AI. And I think that a lot of people outside of the technology space are, to put it bluntly, intellectually intimidated by the space because it's super technical. And that intimidation means that they're just sort of hands off. Like, I don't know this. Exactly. This is technical. I don't want this. And I want people to understand and rest assured that they can understand this stuff, not at the mathematical level, at the algorithmic level, at the data sciencey level, if you like, but at least at the conceptual level. Like what everyone can understand what training data is. It's the data that you use to train your AI. Everyone can understand outputs, right? There's basic concepts that anyone can readily grasp. And then it's a matter of not letting technologists push you around with fancy words, right? So technologists will, whether they're doing it to be intimidating intentionally, or they just don't know how to speak to non-technologists because they're bad at communication, like all experts tend to be. They'll use phrases like convolutional neural networks and stuff like that. And people are like, okay, I'm out. But if you can withstand the barrage of technical speak and actually understand what's being said, and then talk to them in plain language and ask that they talk to you in plain language, you can do your job really well. And I'll just do say one last thing, which is I have a Substack piece called AI Made So Simple Even My Grandmother Could Understand It and She's Dead. So that's my attempt at explaining the basics of AI, forget the risk, just AI as simply as possible. And I think everyone on this call could understand AI enough to talk to those technologists in a way that keeps you in the conversation.
And I would just want to close out this point by reminding all the listeners, AI is going to be a tool that transforms the business process. So partly when we say you need to have the expertise, it's more like the expertise at the process that is going to be transformed. And I suspect if you talk to first line operating people who are itching to drop AI into whatever it is they're doing, they're not going to run up and say, I'm using this cool neural network to do this, that, and the other. They're going to be like, I'm using AI to cut my marketing campaign time in half, and I'm going to be able to automate it while I'm at the beach. And then you'll be able to understand, whoa, we've got 9 steps to think through before any neural net does anything. We don't even care about what it is, how it works. What are you doing? To a certain extent, I compare this to introduction of spreadsheets in the 1980s. You didn't need to know how to be an accountant to worry about spreadsheets. The accountants knew how they were going to do it. Introduction of the web in the 1990s. It took us a while to understand how it was going to transform business processes, but you didn't need to be a coder to understand this is going to transform how we do sales and all that stuff. AI is kind of sort of following that path, I think. Reid, am I right on that?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, I do think there are going to be questions around, did you do X, did you do Y, which will require some understanding of how it works. One thing that is relevant, I think, here is some people will push back and say, and I saw this, I was speaking at a conference on healthcare and life sciences recently. and one of the audience members who's a senior level person on the technology side of the house, sort of between being an executive and being a practitioner, said, we know about all these risks. Like we know all these things, like these bad things can happen. But the point is, it's not just that bad things can happen. It's that with AI, we have new ways of making those bad things happen.
Right. Exactly
new
right.
Sources of those familiar risks. And so since it's traveling unfamiliar paths to get to familiar risks, compliance people would do well to understand what those new pathways are, because of course you need to put roadblocks in those pathways so that the risks don't get realized. So I agree with you absolutely, Matt, that breaking it down to, you just wanted to be more efficient with your marketing, blah, blah, that's going to be crucial. What are you doing? Understanding that at a plain language level is important. The how does get important at some point. Because that's the way that those risks are realized.
So let me shift gears a bit to some of the more practical steps here. I think a lot of listeners will be getting their heads around the idea of having an AI governance committee. And so is that a necessary step? If it is, who's going to be on it? I still struggle with, if you have a governance committee, who's the chair of that AI governance committee? Other people have pushed back on this and they've said, well, we have a risk committee and AI is a risk. I don't need a separate second redundant committee just to talk about AI risks. And that's a valid point. So I'm still looking for more sense of what is the right governance committee? Is that even the right step? Andrew, what would you say? And then Nick, and then I'll circle back to Reid.
So I would ask the first question of what actually goes before the committee, before you even talk about the committee itself. So we've talked already about there's just this whole ream of use cases within corporations that are being developed, and there's articles out there now saying that there's so many use cases you can't seriously kind of wrap a meaningful AI governance processor around it, and it's causing then bottlenecks. And I'm actually I'm going to step out of AI governance at the moment, and I'm going to use my experience from Albemarle as an example. So as many of you know, one of the big issues with the FCPA case was the management of third-party sales intermediaries. And we had a lot of sales intermediaries. And so because you have a lot of individual third parties, not AI use cases, third parties that you're having to manage, that becomes kind of like a process in itself from a sales management point of view, from a technical point of view, from a governance and a risk management. So the very first question that the company asked was, why do we need to have all of those individual third parties? Why don't we consolidate so that we bring it down? Yes, we're managing our risk, but it's also just reducing the amount of time it's taking our salespeople to engage with these sales representatives. And I think it's the same when it comes to AI use cases, is that there has to be some sort of business use case triage of the use cases to figure out if is this problem really worth solving with AI before it even really touches an AI kind of governance threshold. And maybe there's an IT overlay there of actually we're seeing that this use case and this use case and this use case are all linking in or wanting to link in the same data set. There's an opportunity for consolidation there. Then we'll think about kind of like the governance. So I think that's the first thing is what volume of things are coming before some sort of committee. And then the second is, again, there may not be all use cases coming before. So if it's a simple case of an employee setting up their own personal GPT within the enterprise AI tools, and they're put in a bunch of documents that they're allowed to use, and they're asking questions and it's coaching, I don't see that as needing to go before an AI committee. If it's something that's more kind of intensive, creates more risk. If you've got a framework, again, using our third-party risk management analogy, we use third-party risk management frameworks all the time. If you've got a framework that says if it's low risk based on these factors, you're good to go. Medium risk, you need to put ensure these controls are in. And then the highest risk ones get the love and attention of a committee. Then when you get to the committee, going back to the competencies point, you just have to have the right people in the room. Can't just be IT, can't just be compliance legal. It will be dependent on what that use case is. And it doesn't need to be something that is brand new. So a lot of companies will already have perhaps some form of committee reviewing the adoption of new third-party technology. So we had that at my last company. We're bringing in, and particularly if it was processing personal data, there was a committee that was reviewing that the use of the onboarding of that particular third party. You got that holistic risk assessment, only reserved for the highest risk third parties. You just add on the AI use cases to that could be an option.
Yeah, I think a place to start to that point, Andrew, is kind of having an understanding either at an individual level or at a team level, kind of zooming out from it and seeing, well, what does this team or what does this individual produce, right? Like a business is just this collective of a bunch of people doing different things, producing different things. And I think if we have some kind of cursory understanding of what these existing tools can do, you can start to see where someone might be using sort of a shadow AI, maybe that's not sort of claimed yet, where they might be using AI to like generate more of that particular output. And I think if you can look at it from that higher level through that materiality lens, you can probably start to see, to your point, where are these units of production or which of these units of production are most risky. And I think if we can start with the assumption that like I was saying before, that people are going to be looking for opportunities to make their own jobs easier just in their own sort of self-serving way, we can at least start picking which rocks to look under first. Because I get it, like, especially if you haven't been playing around with AI a lot right now, it can be kind of overwhelming to say like, okay, well, there's a ton of hay out here. I don't know where the needles are even living. So taking some kind of a smart risk assessment or taking some kind of a smart inventory on like what jobs are being done and where might tools be leveraged right now to make those individual jobs better, you can kind of make better bets with your time on where that committee might focus its effort.
Reid, what would you say about AI governance committees? And I think Andrew and Nick have raised good points about you need to understand what are you actually going to have this committee do? Does that get back to the political alignment question you mentioned before? Are there other obstacles that you've seen companies struggle with? If you have, how do they get over them? Like, what are we supposed to do with this idea of the governance committee?
Okay, so you do need them. You don't need them, I think, to Andrew's point. You don't need them for every single decision that relates to the deployment of AI. You should already have some things in place. I think the triage, the triage language that Andrew uses is exactly the language that I use as well. There needs to be some kind of triage to see if a deeper dive is needed at all. If you're trying to predict when the screws are going to arrive at the toy factory, chill out. We don't need to wheel in a whole senior level governance board. So I agree with all of that. So then there's two things I want to say. One is I think I might disagree with Andrew on the triage being just business related. I think that there are cases where, for instance, you might say, we've got this idea when we're going to do a triage to see if there's a good business value here, but we're also going to do a triage to see, would this be an absolute cyber nightmare? That's just one example. Because it might be the case that a cyber person takes a look at it and says, yeah, what you're proposing would be a cybersecurity, like the resources that would be required to protect that solution would be significant. And that might speak into the viability of the project at all early on, as opposed to cyber person or another kind of risk person saying, yeah, that's kind of risky, but yeah, go ahead, keep going down the line, and we'll, let's check in after we get further. There's no massive red flags here. So I would include some degree of risk in that initial triage. Now, to your other question about where should that governance board come from, who should they be comprised of? Yeah, it depends. There's not the one way. There's not the one right way. And this is what you see when you work with lots of different organizations. Different organizations just have different kinds of infrastructures. Different departments have different levels of power and authority, right? So in one organization, legal has a lot of power. They have a lot of authority. People listen to what legal says. In other organizations, everybody ignores legal. Nobody really cares about them. They're in some back office that nobody pays attention to. And so it's really, what are the existing levers of power and authority within the organization, and how do we fold AI risk assessments and management into those existing things that, entities or infrastructures of power? In some cases, not only will it reside with one department versus another, but also it might be that we should use an existing risk board. Let's just upskill them. In some cases, it will be, let's make it a subcommittee of that existing risk board. And so, and we'll have sort of a subcommittee chair that reports to that large risk. In some organizations, it makes sense to create a whole new committee out of whole cloth. And there's not, this is the thing to do. We'll do one of these three things. I'm sure there's a fourth thing, given where the existing powers are, levers are, where we have the most alignment, blah, 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 blah. So but I would think about how should we think about what's the strategy behind creating that governance committee as opposed to directly answering who should be on it.
Mm-hmm. So we've got about 15 or 20 minutes left, and we do have a bunch of questions that I want to try and get to. But one thing I also wanted to explore is how the things that we would have done as compliance or risk management professionals to oversee people, how is that going to change if we're overseeing AI doing business processes? And Reid, I think you've talked about this before. For example, if we are going to be using AI agents more, somebody a while ago had asked in the chat, how are you supposed to audit AI? I'm not sure that you can audit AI as much as you're going to have to monitor what AI does all the time. But when they say, how do you audit AI? I think of like, how would you audit the brain cells that are shooting off to get somebody to think? You don't. You just monitor what the person does. And I'm not sure that metaphor is accurate or not, but
it is.
I'm trying to think through what are the capabilities that compliance, audit, and risk teams will need to have at the ready, say in 2 years' time, if AI is everywhere. Do we understand all that? Are we in position for it? I don't know who wants to take first crack at this, but I'll throw it out there.
Sure, I can go. You don't know if somebody you hire has a racial bias. The only way that shows up, to your point, is in like whatever output they're producing. So like the machine is going to produce widgets, whether they're made by hand or whether they're made by a machine. We have to be able to monitor those outputs to start to get some indication that that bias that could be inside of a human's brain, or that bias that's coming out of this multi-layered agentic AI that's now doing a human's job, is like off course. So I think it's going to continue to be an iterative process, and I think we're going to have to continue to monitor what we have monitored in the past, which are the widgets or the outputs or the jobs that are being done.
Reid, what would you say as some of the things that we're going to need to get better at to observe AI outputs, to understand whether AI is behaving the way that we want and in a worthwhile fashion we want to keep going with the project? Like, what would we need to be good at?
So there are things to audit around process that are not just a matter of, as it were, peering inside the AI's brain. So you can look to see what kind of nightmare case scenarios did they identify. You can look to see what kinds of risk, who set the risk thresholds. Did they do it in accordance with the criteria by which you're supposed to set risk thresholds? Did they, what did the testing look like? Mm-hmm. So how thorough was the testing? Let's say that they, let's say it's an AI agent that does marketing, and you want to see if it's putting out brand consistent content or non-toxic content or content that doesn't, violate whatever the marketing policies of the organization are. And let's say this thing creates, I'm going to say 1,000 social media posts every 30 minutes. Right? You can't look through every one, but if the testing turned out to be, we tested it, we did a sample size and we looked at, 5 of the 1,000 posts that it did randomly. Does that seem like, you could audit that, and you can say, was that enough? Probably not. You probably should have done a larger random sampling. And 2, was it actually performed? So you can check to see if that's been done. You can check to see whether people are continuing that random sampling, as this is an example of risk mitigation, right? Once the thing is, so first they're going to test it before they deploy the AI, then they're going to deploy the AI. That random sampling has to continue to happen because of things like model drift. And just the fact that it's operating in an indeterministic way in a very complex environment. So you can audit, is that randomized sampling still going on? So those are all things that you can still check to see without peering inside the AI's brain. There's other things, but that's sort of a glimpse into it.
And Andrew, what would you have on your list of things that we'll need to be really good at? I'm also wondering a bit about getting the corporate culture and getting people engaged to think about this stuff, which is kind of up a compliance officer's wheelhouse. You've been telling people to think about ethics for the better part of 20 years now. This seems like the same sort of exercise, but what would you say?
Yeah, so we're all familiar with the compliance program hallmarks, and in many respects, it's kind of like a lift and shift and applying it in the context of AI governance. So, a lot of what Reid was talking about was monitoring for compliance against the AI governance framework. So, are the things that are set out in that governance, like the testing, has that been followed through? Has that commitment, that control being complied with? I would take a step even further back of just the business ROI case, right? So when you're monitoring, is it working as it was intended, and is it actually doing what the business wants? And if not, then why should we be continuing to put resources into this particular AI use case? That's the first question. The second is controls compliance. But then I still think that there's that need to go under the hood of the whatever that AI application is and see what's actually going on. Is it creating new, scary, unforeseen risks that need to be addressed? So is the AI kind of working in a way that was not expected, is creating risk? How can those be mitigated? And then I think there's also the employee, are the employees using it? There's a behavioral element to it. So if there's a dependency on employee input, is that input being abused? And then you get into all kinds of interesting data privacy questions about how monitoring of AI employee use of these AI applications is that considered to be legitimate? But that one kind of like scenario of an AI use case, it requires several different monitoring lenses. The business use case, is it still there? Are the controls being followed? Are there new unforeseen risks that are being created? And is the employee using it in the appropriate way?
And for all listeners who would like to freak out a little bit, I would encourage you to read a recent study and report from KPMG on AI usage, where they surveyed well over 40,000 people around the world and found that half admitted that they were using AI systems in a way that contravened their policies at their company. Like they knew they were breaking policy, and half of them admitted it. So I'm immediately wondering, what's the real number? Probably even higher.
And these are accountants, by the way, okay?
It was very clear, but it was an interesting study because it also talked a lot about what tools are employees using. And by far and away, they were mostly using publicly available ChatGPT-like tools. That got me thinking a lot of employees really just see this more as desktop software, akin to Excel and Microsoft Word and PowerPoint. And I use those to do my job. I use ChatGPT to do my job. What can go wrong? Well, a lot. But that's a very different risk challenge for companies if you're trying to think through how do we police employees' usage of AI in a compliance manner, let alone ethical. I don't know if any of you have any thoughts along those lines about
how do you police water from taking the path of least resistance? It's just always going to do that. People are always going to do it. So if there's something available, they'll use, if it's locked out of their, don't get any ideas. If it's locked out of their company laptop, well, then they'll use it on their phone, or they'll use it on their personal laptop. Like people are going to find ways to, beat City Hall, so to speak. And I think perhaps that that KPMG study is, surprising. It's also, it's in another way, it's not that surprising because we all know humans, and we all know humans are going to be trying to cut corners, and they're going to try to, do more with less and so forth. So it's soaked into your business way more than you think. 100%.
You have to be pragmatic, right? So an out prohibition is not going to work. And so what do you have to do? You then have to make enterprise AI tools available so that they will use them rather than their own to put in company sensitive information. Then you think about controls. So the way that you set up the AI, in the same way that when you start writing an email that contains personal data, you get the personal data flag going up, and then it limits the ability to send the documents out the organization. Those kind of controls can be built into the AI tool to prevent employees, or at least kind of deleting quickly any sensitive personal data that's being put into AI tools, Or if an employee wants to kind of submit a whistleblowing report into an AI tool, it comes back with a response saying, this is actually not the appropriate forum for this. You need to go to this particular hotline number to do that. There are controls that you can put in place to manage the employee, that kind of casual employee misuse. But then it goes to training, right? You have to go to get the training, and it goes back to that, the core values. Don't ask AI to do something that you would not be expected to do yourself.
So I want to pick up on that training comment. So yeah. I think that's exactly right. In general, I think as we move from narrow to generative to agentic AI, more and more responsibility is put on end users to do risk identification and mitigation, because the technologists can only do so much. They can't control what kinds of prompts end users put into their LLM or to their agent. And of course, the prompt has a huge impact on what the output's going to look like. So that means lots of training is needed. And to me, the sort of one of the giant red flags for people in compliance is that their compliance training is useless for the most part. It's not the right kind of training. I've seen this too many times where, thank you, Nick, it becomes this, everyone knows compliance training in sort of the pejorative sense of that term. It's watch the video, okay, take the test, don't even read the things, just like, should I lie and cheat and steal? No, next, okay, good. And you do it once a year, it's 30 minutes, it's 50 minutes, it's forgotten the second the window closes, if it was even remembered in the first place. And it is aside from being boring, it's stale. And this, with AI, it's stale. In 3 months, in 6 months, forget it, it's done. Right. And so the question for compliance, I think, is how can we play a more helpful role in what training looks like, which is not just CYA stuff, but is genuinely trying to confer understanding and skills upon the people who are using it. And so I think compliance training, at least in this narrow sector that I know of AI risk, compliance training needs to be completely rethought, because it is, in the words of a tech executive that I spoke to recently, we know, quote, it does nothing for no one. And so if compliance wants to not render itself irrelevant, it can't do training in the AI risk space in the same way that it does compliance training about how you can and cannot use our logo.
My sense, Reid, is that it should be training on the AI infused with the values and the risk management itself. So it should actually kind of teaching the employees, much in the same way that we were doing kind of like training my last company on compliance within sales. We didn't do it as compliance training. It was sales training infused with core values principles. Yep. That, to my mind, is the way that will actually be helpful to employees.
Yep.
Just thinking that, like, what would be the correct way to do this training then? It's a very valid point that Reid brings up, but this is about how to re-engineer your business process for AI in an ethics and compliance aware manner. And so you're going to need a couple of different voices to help you shape what that training is. It's a very good question. We have about 7 or 8 minutes left. I wanted to go through a couple of more listener questions. Reid, I'll put this one to you because it's a little bit out there. Somebody asking about AI agents and the idea of agentic misalignment, that the agents are going to start behaving in an unethical way. Yeah. And the question was, could we train AI to behave in an ethical way, or to not do the thing when suddenly doing so would become unethical? And for those who don't know the history here, a couple of weeks ago, Anthropic put out a big study where they had done a testing environment and found AI agents left to their own devices. They would lie, they would blackmail, they would leak secrets, all in the quest of fulfilling their mission parameters. Now, this not
yeah, they would even buy Coldplay tickets for you.
Let's not go there, Nick.
All right.
But so if AI agents can go off the rails and behave in an unethical manner, can you train them to be ethical? Are we going to develop other tools to intercept them? Like, do we have any thoughts on how to get ahead of this?
We already are. I mean, look, can you train a child to be ethical? Yeah, within, not to perfection, but you can do it pretty well. Can you train them to be unethical? For sure. Easy. No problem. That's easier. Same thing with AI. We're already engaged in ethical, if you want to call it this, ethical training of the AI. We can do what's called red teaming. We can do fine tuning. There's lots of stuff that we can do to make sure that it's compatible with our ethical risk standards. If the question is, can we ever guarantee that it won't go off the ethical rails? No, definitely not. This is the risk game. It's mitigation. It's not risk elimination. The only way you eliminate the risk is by not using AI at all, which is not on the menu. So yes, we're already engaged in agentic AI ethical risk mitigation. We are successful to varying degrees. There is not, nor will there ever be a guarantee. So I think that's the answer.
Yeah, for the record, everybody who might have saw that news story, Anthropic deliberately designed testing scenarios where the AI had no ethical choice to see would it stop if it had no ethical choice. And it didn't. It just behaved unethically. But, here in the real world, I don't think anybody's going to build an AI system deliberately to not give it an ethical way to do something. So I also wonder how real that threat might be. Somebody else was asking, what are some of the ways we could incorporate AI into our own ethics and compliance functions to make our lives a little bit easier? Andrew, let me put it to you first and then Nick, but I don't know, what are some of the low-hanging fruit that you've seen?
Yeah, so as some of you may have seen, I wrote a paper on AI use cases for ethics and compliance programs, and that was really just going out around about and just hearing what a lot of companies are doing and supporting companies. So have a look at that. But in 1 minute summary, so you've got the low-hanging fruit where companies, compliance teams are being told, here is your new enterprise AI system, so AI system like ChatGPT, Copilot. You are expected to use it and to make your program better, but also more efficient. And so the lowest use case is where it's effectively seen as a coach. So it's used to enhance policies, training, communications, responses back to employee questions on an individual compliance officer by compliance officer basis. Then some compliance teams are recognizing it as a value and a scale up, and so they've got a AI interface where they're all using, the team is using it. It's got a common knowledge base of all of the company policies and procedures. And so there's then a consistency in the response back so that they can then support the development of the materials and the response back to employees. Some companies are going even further and then using policy bots or chatbots where it's basically employee facing. Obviously, you need to do a ton of testing to make sure it's getting it right and that you've got the actual source material is absolutely locked down and it's not going out into the public domain and drawing from other people's codes of conduct. I've seen the most other common use case I would say is similar on due diligence and on investigations, and it's the same concept where AI never gets tired and it's able to review more documents than a time-sensitive compliance officer perhaps otherwise would. So with due diligence, that expectation, I saw a report that the average kind of due diligence exercise now could end up reviewing 200 pages, your business justification questionnaire, your business partner questionnaire, maybe a draft contract, the code of conduct or the third party's anti-corruption policy. That's all a lot of material. It's too much for a compliance team to kind of manually go through that. This is where AI, if you're setting up the queries right, it can call out inconsistencies between what a third party is saying publicly and then what it's saying in its questionnaires or what it's saying in the screening, what's apparent from screening results. It can put a list of issues together for you to then address to the third party or to then perhaps even draft a due diligence report which is tailored to the audience, whether it's sales or procurement. Similar principle, we start to see that in investigations, where you're having compliance teams bringing together the evidence and then asking the AI, provided you've got the appropriate controls, you're not putting privileged material in there, you've got appropriate data privacy controls, that you're putting the material in there and then you're asking it to kind of thread the needle, identify the trends, identify weaknesses in what a subject of an investigation is saying, to then inform the interview and then ultimately to kind of prepare the report. Then you get to kind of more advanced AI use cases where you may have to kind of rely on third-party vendors, a number of them out there, not least Ethico, where they're doing it at scale and they're able to kind of invest, and you get the assurance of all the controls that come in that. So, I mean, there's just so much to cover, I would say, but those are the two key things I'm hearing.
Well, we are pretty much at the hour here, so we've covered a lot of ground, but Andrew McBride, Reid Blackman, thank you very much. And Nick, I'll let you wrap it up and take it home for us.
All right, well, let's get one more emoji explosion for this. I mean, this was phenomenal. I promised that this was not going to be boring. It was going to be a real deep dive on the risks that we're facing and how we can better mitigate those risks. Now's the time for us to really exert our power, exert our influence in our organization to add more value. If we're not adding value, we run a lot of sort of we're facing a lot of existential risks. So applying these frameworks that we've used in other situations and getting smart with understanding what jobs are being done with the business is going to allow us to really drive that political alignment that's going to be necessary for us to, not get caught off guard. So thank you so much, Andy. Thank you so much, Reid, of course. Thank you so much, Matt. Stay tuned. We're going to take a little break here. The next session starts it starts in a couple of minutes here. What time is it? Does it start? Sorry about that. The next session starts in about 10 or 15 minutes. You're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be our keynote. We have a bunch of DOJ, insiders who are going to come and talk to us about what the government's really looking for in building an effective program. It's on us to drive this effectiveness forward while leveraging some efficiency, but learning those insights are going to be really valuable. So stay tuned. Phenomenal session. 27,000 emojis so far. I love it. Thank you so much, Reid. Thank you so much, Andy. We'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Take care. Cheers,
everyone.